Good morning and welcome. This is the Brattleboro Citizens Breakfast, and today we hear from the staff of the Commons, the editor, deputy editor, and a reporter, the stories behind the stories of the Commons. I was thinking about this. I ran across a quote recently which sort of illustrates something to me. I'm not too sure whether it illustrates to anyone else, but it's a quote attributed to Edmund Burke, but it can't be verified. So I guess that's the first point: is how do you fact check things? Yeah. Well, it really doesn't come from Edmund Burke. It comes from Thomas Carlyle, from about 1841. And you know there were 3 estates in Parliament. Well, Edmund Burke reportedly said there was a 4th estate, and the 4th estate is that reporter's gallery yonder. That's the 4th estate, and they're by far more important than all the rest. And there's applause in the back. And there's truth to that, because with all the talk about transparency in government, who actually makes that happen sometimes? Is it the government that makes it happen? Or is it that reporter's gallery out yonder? With that brief introduction, however obtuse, Jeff Potter, editor of the Commons, Randy Hull, deputy editor, and Olga Peters, reporter.
Bob framed this as, said, why don't you describe the awards that you got and kind of how you got the stories that we recently got a spate of awards from the New England Newspaper and Press Association. And one of the ones that we're most proud of is the coverage that we did on the Brooks House fire back last year. And when I say we, I mean mostly these guys. But I think it's interesting that any good story just starts with how we find out about it. And I think it's a sign of the times that I found out about it just as I was going to bed that Sunday night by reading Facebook. And I saw a comment from a friend who used to work with the WVEW, that's the community radio station, right? I got that right? Sorry, the coffee hasn't fully hit yet. And she said, "Did everybody get out okay?" And of course I'm thinking, get out from where? And it became really clear that something significant was going on. And of course I'm sitting in home in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts at midnight. And so I say to my wife, I gotta go up there. And then the second thought, I said, oh, damn, I gotta wake Randy up. And so for about, it takes me for about 3 minutes, I man myself up to wake Randy up, because I somehow conjure up this image of a sleeping bear. And but I think Randy did tell me once. He said, you can wake me up any time of the day or night as long as the downtown's burning down. And I thought this was, if ever there was a time where I could do that with impunity, this was it. So from here on, Randy, why don't you talk about kind of where that started from your end?
So it was about 11:30 on Sunday night that the call came, and actually Joyce Marcel, my wife, caught it. And it was her job to wake me up. And she knows that unless Brattleboro's burning, leave me alone. So she woke me up, and for a brief moment I just thought, what am I doing? I'm too old for this. I was used to the situation where, as an editor at another newspaper in this town, it was someone else's problem when something happened overnight, if a fire was happening, and there was pictures were needed and coverage was needed. Someone else could do it. Didn't have to worry. I could just roll over and sleep. As you see from the core of the Commons here, it's our problem. So I raced down to Brattleboro, parked in the High Grove lot because I could see that was going to be the staging area I could get in, and immediately walked down the hill and saw firefighters lining High Street, ladder trucks surrounding the Brooks house, smoke hanging over the main street, and just a total mess in terms of what was going on there. And for the next couple of hours, I was walking around, talking to people, taking pictures, just trying to find out what happened. And we all feared the worst at that hour because we thought the building was destroyed. We were still trying to gather up the bits and pieces of what was going on. Jeff could see the flames from coming up from Shelburne Falls, and on 91, from next one, you could see the flames.
As I was driving down Canal Street, just as you kind of round the corner near the Goodger's Market, right at that point, I saw flames just shooting right up through the full roof, and I thought, that building's gone.
Jeff's better at staying up all night than I am. So I handed off the baton to him, figuring I'd be a danger to myself and others if I were still wandering around Main Street at 2 o'clock in the morning with no sleep. And after that, things got interesting.
So I came on the scene much later. I live in Whitingham, and I think I had just come off multiple days in a row of work, more than 5, and so they had decided to let me sleep, and I'm very grateful. So I took over when these guys had really maxed themselves out. So I think you called me, Jeff. Yeah, you called me early in the morning, told me to get into Brattleboro. So actually, this was the second fire, that big fire that I have covered. The first one was the Putney General Store, and I think it was it was within months of me joining the Commons, so I was very green. But Jeff now, there's a tone of voice in Jeff's, that Jeff uses when he calls me out of the blue in the morning that I now know something bad has happened. This is it. Good morning, Olga. Jeff. So, sorry to wake you up. That's fine. I need you to get to Brattleboro. The Brooks fire, the Brooks house. And it just goes right down from there. So anyway, I came in, and I think I must have gotten into town 7 or 8 a.m., I think. And so the streets were still blocked off, and we couldn't get into the Hooker Dunham, where our offices are. So I ended up going all the way around to the back and coming up, and just as I got inside, heard that they were evacuating the building. So my first job actually was to move the office and to find a place for us to set up camp for the day, because our offices were blocked off. And we ended up at the Blue Moose, and that's where we, thanks to Paul and Kenny, they gave us internet, they gave us a space, and that was headquarters. And so from there, you guys had put the major breaking news. And so then I started in on getting community reports. I started in on calling the Preservation Trust of Vermont to talk about historical buildings and how they can be saved after a fire. And I started calling state folks at the state level too. So I started at the broader, longer term issues.
From here, I also want to say that that our now former colleague, who's very much at still will always be a colleague, Fran Lingor Hansen, came into the picture and broke into the Historical Society, and that was Monday night. She basically spent all of Monday and all of Monday night, all night, finding historical photos and writing and researching major fires in downtown. And somebody with an infectious enthusiasm for local history can add it to such a wonderful and just a wonderful dimension to anything that we're doing. It's more about a fire. It's about the emotions. It's about the economy. It's about there's so many aspects of what could be just a building burns down that you might as well just stop there if that's all you're interested in. But I also have to say about the Blue Moose, if anybody's actually worked at the Blue Moose and tried to use a cell phone, you know what happens there. they have a zero tolerance policy. So the fact that Paul and Ken actually not let us into their restaurant, and they actually cleared out a back storeroom for us to use. They could not have been more helpful for letting us set up shop. And you know, we were literally without a place to work on the day that we had to, the one day that we had to work on this story.
We had a way of getting around that, which was we all brought our laptops in. We had Wi-Fi to use. We all had cell phones. We were hidden from the back so we wouldn't interrupt the vibe of the Blue Moose. So we basically had the newsroom set up across the street for the whole of Monday, and we're able to continue working on stories. And this was definitely an all-hands on deck kind of situation. Joyce came out and did a column about the bullseye in the Brooks house. Allison Teague, our Bellas Falls reporter, came down and talked with some of the people who were left homeless. Thelma O'Brien also did some of that. I was out in the street with the governor and with town officials. So we had the first part of the story of the Monday in the aftermath up on our website that day. I was pretty much acting in an old-fashioned capacity, and probably some of you older readers may remember, the rewrite man, the guy who sat at the desk back in the office, who took in the phone calls from the reporters in the field, and then transformed those notes from the field into a story. So my job was pretty much to take what I learned and what all the other reporters learned and keep updating the story as the day went through. I think by Jeff's estimate, I did how many revisions to that story? About 70?
Yeah, about 70.
About 70 revisions to the story between Sunday night when I started the file and Tuesday night when the final version of it was sent to Keene for the press. And it's just constant updating, rewriting, taking stuff out, putting stuff in, taking some of the stuff you took out, putting it back in, rearranging things that keep the story moving forward. And it's good. It's something that weekly papers normally don't do because our production cycle is generally, from Thursday to Tuesday, general crescendo to the deadline. And this was something else. We were working in real time on deadline.
And meanwhile, while Randy's doing all that, I'm rewriting the editorial and recomposing a good chunk of paper. By the way, we also need space to put all this, so trying to figure out what, where it's going to go, what can hold for the next week, etc. There are a lot of logistical issues. Oh, also, our printer probably shouldn't have appreciated a phone call at the last minute saying, "Oh, we need more color. How can we get more color? Can we reconfigure your press?" I should, in case anybody wonders, the Keene Sentinel prints the paper, and they could not be more. They are always incredibly accommodating and roll with whatever we can, whatever weird challenges we can throw at them.
Just to further cement the image that putting out a newspaper is much like watching a swan, that it's very beautiful and poised on the surface, and underneath its feet are going like this. I seem to remember that in the middle of the Brooks House fire, you guys were really on that coverage and updating things as information became outdated. And in the middle of that, I believe Entergy filed suit against the state. So guess what I jumped on? And so it was very interesting because we had the momentum from covering the Brooks fire, which is so important to the community, and yet here's this 90-degree angle coming in with the Entergy case, which again is hitting up against our deadline and is so important to the community.
And that also presents an interesting layout challenge from the practical standpoint of how do you present this news. And if you look at the front page, I think that does a really nice job of emphasizing both stories in very different ways, because Olga gets kind of the top above the nameplate treatment for that story, but the real, the rest of it was, I don't mean this as a pun, but all-consuming. It really did take most of our effort to do the fire story, and for Oka to stay on task with. The rest of it was amazing.
One thing that was really interesting about us for our coverage on that day that we have to think about, that a lot of daily papers don't have to think about, is we have to combine something that is breaking news with a format that's going to sit on someone's coffee table for a week. And so the information needs to be strong enough to stand for an entire week. And I think that was a bit of a juggling act on that day as well.
If we're going to be spending that amount of time, we might as well be spending that amount of time treating a story in a way that's that makes it a little broader, a little deeper, a little longer lasting than what a daily newspaper does. It's just a different animal. It's not necessarily a better animal. It's a different animal. So I'm really proud of these guys for constantly finding ways of doing that and thinking like that, and moving our paper forward in a way that makes sense for our readership.
So by Tuesday, we were able to kind of pull together all the loose ends. You know, Jeff got the editorial page together with a really beautiful editorial. We got pictures from the community, you know, from before we arrived on the scene. Some beautiful fire pictures from our neighbors like Greg Worden and Timberly Hunt, who's in our building. And the final piece of the puzzle came Tuesday afternoon. So this was about 3 or 4 o'clock when the town gave its after-action report about how they fought the Brooks fire. And I'll give Barbara Sundag a shout out here, because she orchestrated a perfect explanation from start to finish with all the principals who fought the fire, explaining what they did, when they did it, how they did it. And that was the last piece of the story that I got and was able to insert in there, the kind of what they call it in newspapering, the tick-tock, or a timeline of what happened. And with that piece, we were able to kind of close out the paper, and we finished up about midnight that night. But I'm proud to say, you know, it was just short of a year that we've been a weekly. But this, I think, was the issue that the Commons came of age. This was probably the most important issue of the life of the newspaper. We showed that under extreme pressure on a major news story, which conveniently enough happened across the street from us, that we could do a good job, and we could muster our meager resources and put together something that stood up, and people saw, and people's eyes kind of widened a little, that, wow, they can do this. And it was just amazing, the kind of teamwork that went into this issue. And in looking at the trajectory of our newspaper, you can trace everything back to that issue of the newspaper. And after that date, we were a different newspaper. And there was no looking back after that.
We're always asking ourselves, how can we do this better? Or did we do this right? Or, you know, I think that's the only way we can get better. And Irene. But we couldn't have done Irene without having gone through this experience. Certainly not done it as well. But I think it's more than just. Here's the thing about a good community newspaper. It's as much about community as it is about newspaper. And I think that whether we're covering a flood or a homicide or a fire in a historic building, it's more than just the 3 of us or the 4 of us or the 6 of us or however many. It probably will never get beyond into double digits. But just people just walking off the street. Even the Putney fire that Olga talked about, her first story, by the way, for which she won a first prize the previous year in the same contest for many of the same attributes. Somebody just walked in off the street with a CD full of photos from that night. One of which was we put on the cover of the paper. You know, as Randy said, Greg Worden let us use one of his photos right on the cover. You know, the information that people share with us, we don't operate in a vacuum. We are one with, if all systems are working as they should, the community is fully engaged in backing us up and giving us the information and being generous with that information and not skeptical or untrusting. It's a really fragile, beautiful relationship, and that's what's constantly evolving, and what just makes this is the best job I've ever had, and it makes and that's what makes it great.
No pressure.
I think what's interesting about working at the Commons for me is it is one of the best jobs I've had as well. I have a background in writing. I'm actually trained in screenwriting, and this was my first journalism job. And I think what is been really interesting for my career is the mentorship. And getting out into the community and learning my skills, kind of by the seat of my pants sometimes, but I like being on that edge, and I think the weekly format has become my favorite because I like that ability to go deeper into a story. And hopefully provide information beyond just that one moment at the meeting or just that one moment at a fire, and go deeper and broader. And I hope that serves the community well.
There's always going to be daily newspapers. There's always going to be social media services like Facebook. There's always going to be whatever the heck Brattleboro is. But that we can emulate any of those things, and we just be reinventing the wheel. What we're always trying to do is find a different way of figuring out, well, what does this mean? And we're doing it on the fly with minimal resources, and trying, with varying degrees of success. But that's the reality of what we're doing and what any newspaper does. So there's always going to be room for a community newspaper in whatever form. It will probably evolve in terms of content and frequency, but I'm telling you, you can throw all the technology you want at news. There is a time and a place for newspapers, and always will be. Yeah, we're rambling now. Anybody have any questions?
What is, if somebody has a story that they feel is worthwhile,
I'm sorry.
if somebody has a story which they feel is worthwhile, what is the best way for them to approach you so that they can get your full attention but not disrupt the work that you're doing?
I think the best way is how you've done it in the past, Steve, I think email is always good. Editor@commonsnews.org gets to me. I've been better about replying to people now that I'm not as understaffed as I was. If we're on deadline and somebody comes by to visit, we can always make an appointment. The real challenge. This brings up a good. I'd like to say something about this here, because Steve has come in with some really great story ideas, and they haven't hit print, and that's not for lack of interest. It's often the best story ideas. It's hard to. The better the story idea, the more research is involved, the more traction you need, and that's where I most feel like we don't have the resources to really dig as deep as we should be, or will. We're always interested in hearing story ideas from anybody, and often they lead to resources and further ideas. Even if we can't attack what you submit, it's much appreciated.
We go to press Tuesday night, and so Mondays and Tuesdays tend to be our very busy days, and so contacting us later in the week is usually better as far as our availability goes. And, you know, it's so frustrating with such a small staff, and poor Jeff and Randy have to talk me out of this tree often. I get really stressed out at all the stories I can't cover because of time or space or what have you. So, you know, please know that I hate it when someone brings me a story and for some reason it doesn't hit print. But that doesn't mean I don't want you to keep coming to me.
One other quick coda to this. We're talking about like major, you know, stories, that multi-source investigations of stuff. We've got a burgeoning arts section, and we're always interested in getting news of events and whatever for our arts calendar, etc. So anything by email to news@commonsnews.org. We'll get your announcements and, you know, the nuts and bolts into the paper as well.
Could you say something about what the heck keeps this thing going financially?
Yes. There are three major funding sources for the Commons. The first is most obvious in the paper, and that's advertising, which, by the way, is up 50% over a year ago, which I think is, and John Moriarty is one of our, in the yellow shirt over there, is one of our crackerjack advertising professionals. And I say professional.
Just another yellow.
Yeah. Coincidentally, he used to work for the Yellow Pages. But seriously, you know, businesses are supporting us not because it's a you want to buy an ad in our yearbook type of morose charity thing, but because a good community newspaper, people read it, and advertising works. It's a local economy at its most fundamental and its most natural. So that's fantastic. The second source of income we have is a little bit of income through grants, foundations. Most of you probably know that the Commons is, and its parent, Vermont Independent Media, we are nonprofit by design. We think that the ends of what we do should be a good newspaper and good community knowledge of news. That's, you know, we don't see what we're doing as a commodity, and we never will. So that's the nonprofit aspect of it. That means that donations and grants and whatever, there are tax implications and advantages. And we truly are a charity in the legal sense of the word. There aren't a lot of opportunities for journalism funding through those means. So that's a fairly vulnerable category. But the most important, one of the most important things is the third source of revenue for us, and that's memberships. I like to say that the Commons is it could be the best free newspaper you ever paid for. Part of our mission is making this paper available to everybody. Think public radio model. That doesn't mean that that we don't gratefully accept memberships to the Commons, and for that you get it in the mail. But what you get from your membership fees really support everything that you've heard today. They pay our salaries. They put they keep the internet on, which we can't work without these days. You know, and we could be as much of a newspaper as you'll let us. And some people in this room have been extraordinarily generous to our operation, and it means the world to us that it lets us do what we're doing and what we love to do.
Spoon Agave. One of the most important needs I have from a newspaper is political news. I need to know, or I'd like to know, how my legislators will vote or are voting, and all those issues. I have to admit I was pretty disappointed last year in your coverage of the select board race. It was one article, but it was the same usual kind of biographical kind of thing, and a few and a few words from each comment, rather than sort of in-depth questions from any real probing of who the candidates really were. And I find the same on the state level as well. We have a major race coming up now. We're going to have interesting candidates, and I'd really like to know a lot about them, and for the incumbents, what they did, and all the various other stuff. It's sort of, as I started thinking about asking this question, what also popped into my mind when I heard you use the word community newspaper, and all of a sudden I found myself thinking, it's a community newspaper, a newspaper of community news, or is it a newspaper that a community of people want to read? Well, let's see if I'm really distinguishing well there. Maybe just in a sense, what is a community newspaper, if that's how you characterize the Commons?
I did not pay Spoon to say that about the legislature. One of my concerns and complaints, and a discussion we've had a lot, is getting more state house coverage. And we do have a kind of barter system with Vermont Digger that we will trade stories with them, and that is how we get the bulk of our state level coverage. But it is something I definitely would like to do more of. Again, it's a question of resources. Because if I spend more time on state news, that means there's less of my time going to Windham County news. So.
Yeah, I would say, I don't disagree with anything that you said, and as Olga said, it's a matter of resources. That particular week, she probably was up to her eyeballs in a VY lawsuit story. And the problem comes when our mission is still bigger than our resources. There's still, our mission is to cover Windham County. We don't do Windham County well as a county yet. We're just only now beginning to scratch doing Brattleboro well, and as Spoon, as you point out, we don't always do that as well as we'd like. And I'm not trying to be facile by saying, just give us more money and we'll do a better job. But it's kind of the whole, how do you grow and develop this newspaper into the newspaper that, not that the same, where a newspaper that Spoon would want, a newspaper that anybody would want, with varying interests and varying priorities. We get a lot of that, and all I can say is that that's the ball on which we have our eye, and we're going to, various. I can't imagine that any routine readers are not going to be disappointed by something, or as we're going forward. And it's all I can say is that it's a matter of resources and priorities. Yeah.
It's probably a sign of where we're at as a newspaper now, that people are actually disappointed in some of our coverage. Because for the longest time, it was more of a, people treated us as a miracle that we got something on the street every week. And now that we're about to enter our third year next year, next month is a weekly, that we can sense how the game is changing, and that now it's that, oh, there's a Commons, that's nice. So, oh, there's a Commons. I can't wait to read it. Oh, there's that Commons again. and that's part of the evolution. We know we're not going to keep everybody happy. We know somebody's going to hate us. We know somebody hates us enough to take papers out of the boxes down there and chuck them into the trash. We've noticed over the past couple of weeks. I guess it's a sign that people are paying attention to us, because they don't, like I think Reggie Jackson once said, they don't boo nobodies.
One last thing on this, and I promise I'll relinquish the mic. If we do disappoint you in some way, it's really important for you to let us know. it keeps us on our toes. You may not like what we have to say, and we may, you know, I would much rather say to Spoon, yeah, we love, you know, we despise the way you want us to cover the select board race, and we did it exactly the way you want. It's tougher when we agree with you, and we just can't do it yet. But it helps us keep it helps keep us in focus. And please don't hesitate to let us know what you think about anything, good or bad, or in between.
Yeah, following up on the resource question and Byron Stuckey's question about how you do it all. How many issues do you print each week, and how many paid subscriptions do you have?
We are publishing, I believe last week we published 6,500, which is 1,000 more than we did when we first went weekly. As a monthly, we were up to about 7,500, which, you know, we had a full month for them to get out there. So that's, you know, we're moving back up there. As far as paid memberships with and the mailings, I think we're about 300. That's a fairly recent. We've been pushing that only since we went weekly, so that's been steadily growing.
We'll stay here for a bit afterwards. Oh, Judy?
Judy Myrick would like to suggest that everybody here become a paid subscriber in order to show our support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
You're in the newspaper.
If you all don't know, there's the event in a tent, which is happening on Saturday, June 30th, and it's at the Vebek, right, the Familori Farm, and it'll be a music event, Music New England, and the announcement here is that the organizers are looking for volunteers, ushers, ticket takers, parking attendants, all that kind of thing. And you may even get a T-shirt if you're a volunteer. That's yet to be determined what the benefits of a volunteer are. You may get admission to the event. But if you're interested in volunteering, there is an email that I was given, but it might be easier, since you all probably have my email because that's how you got here. Just email me and I'll put together a list for them. My email is robt.oeser@gmail. Don't spell out the Robert, it'll go to a rock musician in Darmstadt.